Hi everyone, my name is Madison Harbum and I will be going over Sidman chapter 4 for this discussion. Sidman starts off the chapter by asking, why do we punish and what do we want to get out of it? The reason why we punish others is because we want to control their behavior. Oftentimes the word behavioral control can have a negative connotation to it as people are intimidated by the term, as they are unsettled by the idea of controlling others or having others control them behaviorally. However, there is a quote in the first paragraph of chapter 4 that puts it into perspective for us. That says, if the purpose of punishment is not to control behavior to discourage lawbreakers and potential offenders from doing the same thing again, then the motivation can only be revenge. But surely we do not seek revenge against children who misbehave or who endanger themselves and others by playing with fire or who impulsively run out into the street that is heavy with traffic. This kind of gives us the idea that not all behavioral control is bad or is intimidating, that sometimes behavioral control can be used for the better and can be used to create safety. So moving on with this chapter, I'd like you guys to keep this quote in mind when we're reading about punishment. I think that it's just important to see this point of view. Sidman then goes on to explain how we can use punishment, and we can use punishment through removing positive reinforcers. An example he gives of this is sending a criminal to prison, how that criminal's preferred activity is probably spending time with loved ones, but since he's in prison, that's being taken away from him as he's isolated there. Another way we can use punishment is through negative reinforcement. An example that Sidman used of negative reinforcement is when a criminal goes to prison and they get beaten in prison. The beating in prison will decrease the likelihood of that criminal engaging in any type of unlawful activities, as that kind of created that negative experience for them. Sidman then talks about how nobody likes to be punished, but ironically, we punish people all the time through laws and social customs. And with this, we don't really question it, we just kind of accept it for what it is. Then he asks the question, does punishment accomplish its purpose? But it's not a simple yes or no answer. The answer is more philosophical. He gives an example of people using the argument that punishment shouldn't be used, but this is often supported through claims from religion, morality, and just like common decency. But on the other hand, people say that punishment should be used, and they use claims from religion, morality, and also common decency. And Sidman then goes on to explain that very rarely do people care about the actual data. Sidman says, with behavioral analysis, we're able to figure out how everything works using science and very controlled experiments in labs and not basing it on our feelings. Sidman explains that we study punishment with an ongoing baseline of stable activity that gives us a reliable measurement tool. With the study of punishment, reinforcement is also a tool for generating a behavioral baseline that will help facilitate with each person. Sidman also says that food can be used to generate and maintain a person's baseline activity. He also says that electric shock can be used as negative reinforcement, and that food is more for like positive reinforcement. And that shock is an effective tool because it is widely used across all species. He also mentions that with shock, we must understand the technical adequacy of the experiment. If we feel that our use of electric shock is morally wrong and we cannot adequately control that punishment, we are producing unclear data. The technical adequacy of this experiment is a prerequisite for an ethical evaluation. So with shock, there always must be technical adequacy. Sidman gives us an example of a rat. He says that the rat learned that whenever he pressed the bar, basically he could get food. But now, whenever the rat presses the bar, he gets a food pellet and he also gets a shock that's about like a quarter of a second long and it's very mild. The animal eventually stops pressing the lever, but the rat does eventually start up again, and when he presses the bar, it is super fast despite the shock. Sidman then says that if they had not continued observing the rat, that they would have thought the punishment would have been successful. The rat dealt with the shock because the rat wanted the food and it was the only way the rat could get the food. With positive reinforcement, the shock lost its effectiveness as coercive, unless it was very intense. But if the punishment is strong enough, then it can put an end to life-sustaining positive reinforcers. Sidman does say that misbehavior persists in spite of punishment because it is also reinforced. Most of us prefer to reinforce alternative behaviors, but sometimes we have to punish with behaviors that are too strong. There are many times when applying punishment accidentally turns into reinforcement. But if we were to give the rat only the shock and no food, then the rat keeps pressing for the shock because now the shock itself has turned into a positive reinforcement. Sidman then goes on to compare this example with children who have autism who engage in self-injurious behaviors. Sidman says that children with autism are usually ignored because they are perceived as unintelligent, vegetables, so forth. So they engage in self-injurious behaviors to gain attention. They've been taught to bring pain to themselves to get attention. Sometimes children with autism, if they are given this attention, the self-injurious behavior decreases. Other times, there are some cases that the SIB may continue because the pain itself became a positive reinforcer. The reason why we engage in punishment to stop an undesirable behavior is to prevent someone from doing something that is dangerous to themselves, frightening, immoral, inappropriate, abnormal, and so forth. Sidman explains that there are two ways to use punishment to meet this objective. The first way is to administer very strong punishment, kind of like a one and done, so the subject never engages in that behavior ever again. The second way is to give the subject mild punishment to make them stop misbehaving for at least very temporarily. He then goes on to explain that in addition to reducing unwanted behaviors, that punishment does many other things when we take all of its effects into account. So when we apply punishment, it's important to just be cautious and keep an open mind out for it, that it shouldn't be the first tool we go to. So my question for everyone is, can you think of a time where a negative reinforcement used for punishment turned into positive reinforcement? And this can be in your job, in your everyday life, just like a general example. And if you can't think of an example for that question, can you give me an example of where you have used punishment in your life, whether it's with your kids, with your clients, just an example in general. So anyways, I appreciate everyone for watching my video, and I can't wait to start a discussion.